And we are live. This is beautiful. Welcome to Terraform Thursday. Welcome to the HashiCorp Terraform Community Office Hours. I'm your host, Kerim Satirli, and I'm joined today by Mary Cutrali and Brian Flad, who we'll talk to in a second. But before we kick off, just a quick reminder. If you have questions or comments during the session, we'd love for you to interact with us in the chat. So on the right side of your screen, usually. As you do so, please keep in mind our code of conduct in this virtual space. In general, be welcoming, inclusive, respectful, and just not offensive. Super easy, but you can review the full code of conduct on our website, and we'll have a link for that in the chat as well. And with that, let's get started. My name is Kerim Satirli. I'm a developer advocate for HashiCorp, where I focus on the infrastructure line of products. I'm joined today by two fine folks from the AWS Provider team. On my left, which might be your right, I have our product manager, Mary Cutrali. And on the other side, we have engineering lead, Brian Flad. Thank you for being here today, you two, and welcome back. It is poetically beautiful that I get to host the last edition of this year's Community Office Hours with the two guests that I hosted. My first session when was it? In May. This year has been a blast, and thank you for always being here for our community and for being able to make time and take questions. So for the folks that missed you in May and September, Mary, what do you do at HashiCorp?
Cool. So I am the product manager, as you said, for the Terraform AWS Provider. So I look after the provider. I look at all of the issues that are coming in. I talk to customers, I talk to community members, I do product research. So occasionally you'll see me in GitHub asking questions, or you'll see me on Zoom asking questions. So we basically just stay curious and nosy about what practitioners are doing in order to enable all of those cool things inside the provider, working with folks like Brian and our engineering manager to make sure that we're able to get all the things done that folks would like to see.
I think asking for feedback is always nice. And I've seen you around in the GitHub issues. It's very nice. I think you even have one of those Calendly links on your GitHub profile, which we'll share later. So if you want to provide feedback, I think you're always up for that. And that's great. Brian, over to you.
Hey, yeah.
The first time you were here, you were still a senior software engineer. Now you're the engineering lead for Terraform Providers.
Yeah, that's great. My role here at HashiCorp specifically now is that, I'm kind of technical in a technical leadership role for, the engineering team that's responsible for the AWS provider. And part of that, is helping the community and the engineers there be enabled and, make the solutions that make the Terraform AWS provider possible at such a large scale actually happen as quickly as we can. Sometimes involves community management type things, sometimes involves coding, sometimes involves, working with the product folks, and sometimes working with the other engineering teams as well for good solutions for certain problems. Yeah, in a nutshell, it's a little bit of talking, a little bit of coding, a little bit of fun, all mixed together.
All very important work, because as we know, Terraform Provider releases weekly on Thursday. I know today's release is coming up in a bit, which is very nice. But when we talk about releases, let's have a look at reInvent. There's been a ton of stuff announced. What are you two most excited about? Mary.
I get to go first. Very exciting. So I am super excited about Network Firewall. Our team spent a ton of time in the background before reInvent working with the Network Firewall team at AWS to make this possible to provide launch day support. It is a really cool service. I think it benefits a bunch of use cases that we see not only in enterprise, but in smaller companies as well. I am super excited for our practitioners to try it out and tell us what they would like to see. But I'm really happy that we were able to release that and that we were able to support our friends at AWS on launch. So that's what I'm excited about.
I think to me, it's super amazing when you see something being announced on the reInvent event page and it's like, cool, it's actually already there. sure, I mean, it's a partnership, but as a practitioner, which I still see myself as, that it's just amazing because it means that I don't have to go in and click things. I can just try it out the way I'm used to, which increases my adoption. Brian, what are you most excited about?
Yeah, there's been a ton of exciting things happening in the container space and the machine learning space. I think for me, kind of the ECR public announcement was pretty interesting. Especially everything happening with Docker Hub, and some of the other ECR improvements as well for like cross-region replication is pretty fun. So yeah, it's going to be really exciting to see as Amazon gets deeper and deeper into this kind of containers world, whether that's Kubernetes or the ECS or ECR solutions. It is pretty neat to see. And yeah, shout out to the Lambda team that actually helped us get some like container support as well in there.
Yeah, we actually had a couple of nice reInvent deep dives around that, which we'll link to. In general, we do a lot of these community office hours around our products. So if you ever feel like, hey, what should I do on Thursday? Obviously, it's Terraform Thursday, so you should just join us. Today, we have the folks from AWS. Sometimes we have others. Actually, we rotate, and it's a lot of fun. You get to join, you get to ask your questions, and we'll answer them live. In the meantime, there's been so many announcements. I'm like, my morning these days has been like, okay, let's go to the site and let's read what happened in the past 12 hours since I actually switched off my computer. And it's like, I think from all the stuff that's been announced, the one that I'm super excited about is probably one of the silliest ones, GP3 support for volumes, because, well, savings is always nice. Any idea when that is going to land?
Cool. So it is very close to complete support in Terraform. I don't have a hard estimate as to when it would land, but there's only a little bit more that we need to do to be able to support the full GP3 experience. Brian can talk about what that little bit is and what you can do with GP3 now. So I'll pass it over to Brian.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so the way that it kind of worked is that, when EC2 announces like a new volume type, it kind of pops up in a bunch of Terraform resources. And in this case, it's not only just, change your volume type from GP2 to GP3. There's also a throughput option that they now provide. So you can customize based on, pricing and your requirements, business requirements of how much throughput and your volume actually needs. So it is pretty neat. We have it in a bunch of the resources now. I think Launch Templates has it and a few others. I think there's just a few little stragglers left. There's some supports that will be released hopefully later today. And yeah, the last little bits will probably be very early next year.
Exciting. Start off the new year by slashing your storage bill. I think always looks great on your yearly review. Last month before that review, just get a 20K savings in, make you look good to your boss. I actually did that with Terraform once when I had my first day at a new job. Just went in there, inspected all the EBS volumes, brought everything into Terraform, and then just, I was going to say killed all of them, but obviously we backed up to S3, which was a lot cheaper, and it was beautiful. Cost savings is a very nice way of making your company happy. So in the meantime, if you're just joining us, we're here with the AWS team. Well, two of the people from the AWS team, because obviously there's more. If you have questions around how Terraform and AWS work together, or what's new and what's coming, please ask them in the chat. So one of the new features that's just came out was AWS Cloud Shell. I think that was like 2-3 days ago by this point, 17th, 14th, 15th, something like that. Curious, how do we get Terraform into that? That'd be a good one, an exciting one.
I can talk a little bit about that. Right now, no solid plans for Cloud Shell at the moment. But it will involve a little bit of our work and a little bit of AWS work. So I think we'll spend some time in the new year talking to our partner side at AWS, figuring out, are we able to support Cloud Shell? Can Cloud Shell support Terraform? How will that work? Once we all come to an agreement about, does AWS provide the necessary tools for us in order to support it? And can we then interact with those tools? I think we can then look at, when will we be supporting Cloud Shell, or when will Cloud Shell be supporting Terraform? But again, just true partnership. Like any future launch at AWS, anything that you see supported in Terraform, usually it's a conversation between the two of us, and it involves a little bit of work from each side of the AWS and HashiCorp fence.
Yeah, I think something cool here is that I was looking in our internal company communications, and I saw some folks already like, hey, you can go install Terraform normally, and it will actually work, which is kind of fun to watch as well. So just a little tidbit there. It does actually work if you try it. And yeah, hopefully someday we'll be, I think some of the other cloud providers actually do bake in Terraform automatically. So hopefully we get there.
Yeah, I mean, manual installation is definitely a good way to get it in there. Also pretty useful if you're on one of the older versions of Terraform that don't support cross-version states, which we had a session about this last week. We talked about the 0.14 features where you can now read state from various versions without having to upgrade. Super nice feature. Something like that is going to make Cloud Shell a lot easier when, your shell does not lag behind because yesterday's released version of Terraform, in example, has not been updated yet. Makes it useful. But I'm not surprised people have already thought up ways of installing new stuff around that. In the meantime, it's been 3 months since you two have been here. If you look back on the changelog, there has been a ton of new features that have been added. What's one you're most excited about, Brian?
That's a cool one. Yeah. Our my engineering colleagues have been really busy, helping get in community support for things. Some of that includes like formation that's in progress right now, image builder, and Lambda, all kinds of functionality, especially helping work with the actual AWS Lambda team as well. There's just, sometimes it's hard to just pick one, you have to kind of like you choose your battles here, I guess, which services you're looking at, because at the end of the day, we're supporting like a large breadth of AWS functionality, so it's pretty constantly updating.
I mean, it seems to me as an outsider impossible to be in a perfect lockstep with what AWS is releasing, even if you have access to the partner team and a heads up before it gets released. Mary, do we have a count on how many resources we currently have?
I counted last week, and we are at over 600. I can give you the exact number very shortly.
Wow.
But yeah, so we are somewhere in I think it was 611 last week. I don't know exactly how many this week, but you will find it. You too can run a really simple JQ script and count the resources in the provider. But again, we will add more things this afternoon. We generally add a few every release, somewhere between 5 and 15, depending on the size of the release. Now, that's to say, resources are atomic units, so we are not adding 5 to 15 new services every week, but we are expanding the coverage for services that already exist in the provider. I wish we could add 5 to 15 new services every week, but we are a small but mighty team. So 5 to 15 new things in general.
I mean, 5 to 15 is still more than most teams ship, in a solid month. So I'm going to say that's very nice. I think one of the new ones was lake formation, and was it the managed prefix list for EC2? Both very nice. In the meantime, we've got 2 community questions. Will Terraform support EC2 instance reservations?
I think we would like to. So we are currently, it is not on the current roadmap, which is now through the end of January. Just for folks that do not know, our quarters are offset by 1 month. So our last quarter of this current year will end at the end of January. And then mid-January, we'll start to think about, well, really honestly, beginning of January, but mid-January, we'll start to think about what the next quarters and next years will look like. And so I think that's something that we definitely would love to support. EC2 is one of the core services in our provider. It's a place that we like to, have as much coverage as possible. And so in the new year, I think we'll have a better idea of if, when we can look at including that in the Terraform provider.
And you mentioned the roadmap. I think we're going to share a link for that shortly. It is super cool to just be able to go into the provider's Git repository and have a roadmap there that tells me, hey, this is what's coming out. Means I don't need to bug you, but it also means that it's very nice to just know. It helps me plan around the crazy stuff that we're doing, which is always nice. In the same vein, we have a PR that's been opened for the Amplify console, and it's been lingering for a while. Is there any opportunity to get help with getting that PR merged and mainlined?
So I have some.
That's a process question, I feel.
Yeah, so good process question. There's a couple different ways. So for things that are on the roadmap, you will see, folks from the engineering team dropping into your PR at any point during the quarter. They will walk you through code review, help you with running tests if you need to, that kind of stuff. Now, if you have a PR that's been open for a while, we have either triaged it a long time ago, or it needs to be re-triaged, or things have gone awry communication-wise. There are two ways. One is feel free, again, if it's something that's super important, you want to talk through your workflow, you want to talk about why it's super important, you can hit me up on my Calendly link on my GitHub profile, which I think we'll put in the chat at some point. I'm happy to talk about that anytime and talk through why you might need something, where in your workflow it fits in, and how that works. Otherwise, our engineers run a weekly triage in GitHub. So you may see someone drop in letting you know, hey, we see this. We are not going to get to it, right now, or we're getting to it right now. Here are your next steps, and here's where we'll go from here. Our hope is that as we continue to mature our triage process, and as we continue to grow our team, we'll have PR sitting for less time. Now, Amplify is a special case because Amplify is one of our top 10, top 5. It might even be our #1 GitHub issue after we work through this quarters. And so there's a likelihood that this will end up on our roadmap in a probably in the next quarter, next year sometime. And so in this case, we would ask, could you please hold while we get to it? Because we'd like to work with you to make sure that we're able to introduce this new service in a way that feels really good for us and our community and you. So I think I've talked through the product process for that, but if Brian wants to talk through the engineering side, if I missed anything, I'd be happy to hand it off to him.
Yeah, I mean, from the engineering side, the things that we're going to be looking for is making sure that, we have this large section of documentation within the code repository that is the contributing guide. And the contributing guide is a novel, but it does help go through a bunch of scenarios in terms of how the code should be set up, how the testing should be set up, and how the documentation should be set up. And once all those three things kind of combine into one, giant transformer thing, you get the lovely things of submitting pull requests in, and, we have a bunch of automated testing that happens. It's not just because a PR has green checks on everything doesn't mean it's caught everything or is everything we're looking for, but that's what I actually spend a bunch of my time personally trying to make those checks even better so contributions can flow in faster. The way that I like to think about, the Terraform provider development here is, we're trying to build and rebuild the plane as we're flying it. We have a bunch of 5-year-old code. We have a bunch of brand new concepts that don't really exist in other places when it comes to infrastructure as code. So there's a lot of work that happens behind the scenes, not just feature and requests and everything getting in. There's also a bunch of work that happens to make the Terraform experience better for everybody.
Which I think all the practitioners appreciate. I hear you on the trying to fix something, while it's in movement. I think Kristen last week used the same metaphor by saying, we have a dinner party upstairs and we're trying to replace the basement, making sure that everything keeps working. And it cannot be easy. I'm 100% convinced of that. But we appreciate features that work. And I think a little bit of weight in general is better than a rushed feature that then needs a re-release. So that's all good. For folks that want to get started with contributing to Terraform, we'll share a link to the contributing guide for the AWS provider. Obviously, not the only thing you can contribute to. And contributions don't just have to be code. They can be documentation. If you're working with a resource and you notice that an attribute is missing or something is misspelled, that's a totally legit contribution that you can make as well. And it is very meaningful, because if it annoys you or if it's confusing to you, it's probably confusing to somebody else. And even if you just help one person, and I guarantee you, you're going to help more than one person, but even if it's just one, still worth it.
Yeah, fun, interesting fact with contributions in the project is that we turned on a little bit of functionality that will send a pull request comment when there's a new contribution that comes in, and it'll say, hey, thanks for joining the community. Here's the contributing guide and FAQ and all that good stuff. We did a little quick check of that, having run it for a month, and we saw over 50 new contributors in the last month. So it just kind of helps show the scale. And a lot of these contributions are the things that Kerim was just talking about, fixing these small little, documentation things or small bugs or those sorts of things. And, it's amazing to see the village that it really takes. And, it is amazing that, everything can kind of flow through when it works out well.
Yeah, I think all those small things, all those small pebbles still end up building that house and still end up building the tower that eventually becomes the airport and eventually becomes the plane, for keeping those metaphors, and then takes off into the clouds. It's one of those days where we get to make really, really bad jokes. So if you're just joining us, I apologize for that, but we're here with the AWS provider team. So ask questions that you're interested in about contributing. And let me see if we have any new questions come in, because if not, I've got a couple of new questions. So in the meantime, Lambda support. There's a lot of new stuff happening. Brian, do you want to give us a quick summary of what's new?
Yeah, absolutely. Over the last maybe 3-4 weeks, there's a few things that have popped in. I'll start real quickly with the ones that just showed up this week that we just found out about as well. So that's adding Kafka as an event source into Lambda. And there's some also additional functionality going into the service for automatically checkpointing, things as they come in from streaming sources like DynamoDB and Kinesis. So yeah, those are brand new, and they'll get in at some point. But the two exciting things that we were able to work on launch day support with Amazon directly with the development teams there, and was the first one was code signing. So this is the ability for you as a person who's writing Lambda code to go through and say, hey, I want to make sure that when I distribute this, people can make sure that it's valid and verified from a security perspective. Just another layer to increase your confidence that if you're grabbing random code to introduce into your Lambda functions and whatnot, that hey, everything is more secure in that sense. from a code perspective and where it came from. So that gives the ability to like revoke things and do all kinds of stuff. There's a very nice blog post about that on the AWS blogs about how code signing in general works and how it works with the Lambda service. The other one is the container support as well for Lambda. So this means you can inject Docker images into your Lambda functions. Really neat. You know, rather than using zip files, if you're already working in a Dockerized world, you know, or using that format for things, it just simplifies your life a little bit better. So you don't have to repackage things just specially for Lambda.
I think what I love about the whole idea of being able to sign my code is to make sure not only can an attacker not as easily deploy stuff in ways that they shouldn't be able to do, but mostly the thought that if I mess something up, it won't get signed, and it's just another layer of integrity checks, which I think is always nice. We're all human. It's been a stressful year. We make coding mistakes, unintentional or sometimes, you know, knowingly. Yeah, and things go wrong. So any layer that we can add in there to make sure our code that gets deployed is solid or doesn't get deployed. If it's not solid, then that's always good. In the meantime, we've got another question from our audience. Do AWS engineers contribute to the Terraform provider?
Oh, thank you for asking. This is actually a great segue from Lambda because the Lambda engineers do contribute quite a lot, and we would be remiss to not mention that due to their support and contribution, that's how we were able to have support for containers and code signing on day of launch. So we're super thankful to teams like the Lambda team and some of the SAs and Amazon who are regular contributors to the provider and help us to continue to expand coverage. We also, you know, there are other, let's call it indirect ways that folks from AWS contribute, where it's not necessarily that they're making code contributions, but, you know, through our relationships with service teams, whether it's PMs or SAs or other folks at AWS, we are able to kind of all be in the room and design features together and determine sort of which things that AWS is launching end up in the Terraform provider. And so, you know, yes, we have folks that contribute code. You may see them around the GitHub. And then we also have the folks working behind the scenes at AWS to make sure that we're all on the same page to deliver the features that folks want.
Yeah, teamwork makes the dream work, but it's important to get all those features out, and it's a lot easier when people help you. So thank you to the AWS folks that helped us make the AWS provider better. Your contributions are very valid and very valued. In the meantime, what other questions do we have from our group? See a couple of familiar names in the chat. It's always nice, even 7 months in, we still have folks in here that join us and have great questions. Thank you for that. I think that's beautiful, especially after many weeks and many months of virtual events. We're trying to keep it fresh, and the audience participation really helps with that. So as we head into holiday periods, I'm curious, what are your hack projects that you plan on working on when you're not working?
So I am actually not working on a like tech related hack project, but I do fiber crafts. You see them behind me. So I have some weaving projects to do over the holiday. I'm very excited. Weaving sort of algorithmic, but in a very like analog way. And so yeah, I have 2 tapestry projects, super excited to work on them. Maybe you'll see one behind me at some point. But yeah, no tech projects for me, just analog.
Just
disconnecting a little bit, always nice. How about you, Brian?
Yeah, funny you bringing that up. So non-tech related, yeah. Funny enough, I think this will be the first year trying to cook a prime rib, of all things. So, you know, a little pricey endeavor, but want to try it. Tech related, might poke at some tooling to help the Go community with some of the problems that we have with like the large code base that we have that has a lot of slow running tests is the ability to pick and choose exactly which of those to run based on, Git history and that sort of thing. So might poke at that a little bit over the break, but again, 2020 has been a rough year for everybody. It's really the relaxing is honestly the number one priority.
Relaxing with prime rib, I can see how that would work out. You actually mentioned something that I'm very curious about. Let's say I contribute a new resource or change an existing one. The tests get run. How does that work? Do we actually spin up all the resources that are mentioned there? How do we test around the world, different regions?
Yeah, so the way that Terraform testing has worked from the very beginning, actually, when Mitchell and Armand and a few folks that were helping originally write Terraform, they designed the testing framework to work end to end, basically, meaning that you write a Terraform configuration in the test file, it gets created, readed, updated, deleted, just like any other Terraform config that a normal practitioner would run. And then it has the ability to inspect what happened basically in the Terraform state, and it still has access to the API clients and all that good stuff. So yeah, when we have contributions come in, we've had a focus, especially this year, for doubling down on our testing for other AWS partitions, in particular GovCloud. And part of that means that we had to take a lot of our testing that was originally written, say, 5 years ago, all the way up till now, and hard coded for a US West 2 region or a URL or endpoint that was specific to AWS commercial to make it so it could actually run everywhere. So there's been a ton of work, a ton of people involved with that. And at the end of the day, what happens now is that we basically, for a lot of new contributions that come in, we'll double check it between AWS Commercial and AWS GovCloud. Those are kind of like our more like official, yes, we'll test it pretty much every time areas. Best effort for, other places based on, hopefully the coding is okay for things like local stack and other things that might not support things day one. But unfortunately, there's only so much we can do in those cases because we have to keep up with Amazon and what they support. Yeah, so in general, it's like, we basically take every pull request that comes in and do spin it up end to end. So if that means spinning up a VPC and a subnet and an EC2 instance and, checking everything in the EC2 instance when it's created, that's what we do.
It has a lot of different regions, and you mentioned local stack, which has been nice to develop against. And it's nice to just go into Terraform, change your region, and most of the things work. And to me, the first time I did that was very surprising. Not from the Terraform side of things, but just because somebody was able to replicate one of those APIs well enough that Terraform would just understand it, and it's just beautiful. In terms of regions that are non-standard, how does AWS China factor into Terraform usage?
I can speak to that from a technical perspective, and then I can let Mary chime in with a product perspective. From a technical perspective, AWS kind of has this mentality, kind of like they publicize that most of the support that gets out for functionality does wind up between commercial, sometimes GovCloud, and usually China. And I'm using very specific wording there because I guess that kind of how it generally winds up is like usually commercial and China generally have functionality pretty soon. GovCloud usually a little bit after, if not at the same time. And then there's also other places that AWS supports, like the secret and top secret partitions that that's up to that community's needs basically for when stuff gets in. So from a technical perspective, we try to be defensive when we add code in to make sure that hopefully those what we consider older APIs, because they just haven't been updated with the new functionality, still are supported. So that can be a little bit of a challenge sometimes, yes.
Yeah, Brian pretty much answered everything, but from a product perspective for us, if AWS offers it there, we too try to offer it there. Obviously, with things like GovCloud and Top Secret, again, it's all dependent on do those things exist in GovCloud and Top Secret and how do they exist? And then with AWS China, again, there's all sorts of like US tech law, international tech law things that I don't know a ton about. And so we defer to both our council and like AWS's council to let us know if we have to do any special things to support something in AWS China. But generally, if AWS supports it there, so do we.
Yeah, I guess another interesting perspective on this is like, yes, there's all these AWS partitions that exist out there, but also like AWS has been getting very much into these like, I actually don't want to call them niche. They're actually extremely useful other types of environments. So for the longest time, AWS has had these like snowball, snow cone type, snow family, they call it, type things that are rugged devices that you can take out in the middle of nowhere and run Amazon, services on. More recently, they've come out with Outposts, which is, either they'll stick a rack or like I think they just announced this reInvent for like actual just like servers that you can actually get into your data center. It's a little bit smaller and a little bit more palatable for some folks. Yeah, and beyond that, it's like AWS is also getting into kind of these other areas that are a little bit more fun of like local zones. So they came out with basically, I think of it as like a single availability zone, but just in a different city, if you will. So like Los Angeles happened to be the first one. Now there's a few that are coming out. And also Wavelength, which is just a fascinating service where they're getting involved with the telco companies, telecommunications companies out there that do kind of wireless cellular type things and running AWS APIs and services like presumably near cell towers. So you get really low latency. So that's kind of fun from our perspective is that, in Terraform, we get to have the fun of supporting and trying to test on these different environments. So when somebody comes in and says, hey, I would love to run things on Outposts, can I do it with Terraform? Hopefully we can say yes to those things.
Yeah, I'm excited about getting one of those 42 unit racks at home. Still a discussion to be had, but it would be beautiful to just be able to run Terraform against that and say, well, look, this is just my job.
I've been trying for 3 years to get direct connect to my house, which means AWS is going to run a fiber right into my networking stack.
When you need it, you need it. I understand that. Yeah. Everything needs to get faster, and that's the only way. Outpost is really exciting because you essentially get to use all the APIs you are used to. And let's imagine you're one of those companies that's currently going through a digital transformation, right? 2020 accelerated all of that. And you're like, we still have some stuff on premise that we definitely need to keep there. But everything else we do in AWS with Terraform, there's a missing link. And it's going to be amazing when Terraform supports that so cleanly, where all you have to do is change a region and have connectivity, of course, which, yeah, one of the smaller things.
Yeah, I think one of the announcements at reInvent this year was Redshift. If you spin up your new Redshift clusters with the new node types, apparently you can move it between availability zones, zero downtime, I believe. Very, very fascinating. I'm sure it's interesting how it works under the hood.
There's been a lot of cross-region stuff for S3 and others. It's super nice to just be able to go into your code and say, hey, this is what I need to have enabled. I'm curious, when you built that, how hard is it, how involved is it to add cross-region support to a new feature? How do you check it's actually replicated?
Yeah, so from our perspective, we're a little beholden to what AWS gives information-wise. Some of the services tend to be, I guess there's kind of two schools of thought with how this might work in with services. Some services, like you have one kind of like main region, primary region, if you will, that you spin up things, and then you tell it to add replicas in other regions by talking to the primary one. With other services, it actually winds up being like you spin up a thing over here, you spin up a new thing over here in a different region, and then you tell it like, oh yeah, I'm actually part of that thing over there. You know, and from our perspective, you know, we kind of have to support both models, and you know, it's really just like what the APIs are providing us. The way that it typically works in Terraform is that, you know, and with AWS in general, is that there's a API call to create something, and then like right afterwards we do this like kind of polling check of like, hey, are you done yet? Are you done yet? Are you done yet? Kind of like a kid in the back seat, you know. And after that's all set, then Terraform's like, yay, hopefully.
I remember my first time having RDS replication enabled and wondering why it took so long, and then enabling debugging mode and just going through the logs and like, oh, that's why. It is actually, we've gotten used to this, you know, like finger snipping fast infrastructure deployment where you have a couple of lines of code, maybe a Terraform module that you freshly pulled from the registry, and you're like, hey, cool, give me 100 EC2 instances and boom, done. And that's all you do. And then you switch to RDS, takes a lot longer. And without knowing the back end story of that, it gets really confusing. It's like, why is Terraform so slow? It's not. Sometimes the API takes a little while because Terraform and AWS want to make sure your data is actually replicated, which is what you want with databases.
Yeah, I think something interesting, some of the other cloud services I've heard inklings of from internals is that, you know, they sometimes keep pre-warm kind of infrastructure ready to go. So if you make a API call to create something, it kind of like grabs one out of that pool and is ready to go. It seems like Amazon just in general, probably for data security and other reasons, you know, tends to go with the model of let's create things as we go, which is just an interesting perspective. Might take a little longer, but it's a little bit more guaranteed and reliable in that sense.
I think as part of the shared responsibility model, it is kind of nice knowing that the instance you just started was freshly provisioned for you and has not been lingering around. Yeah, data integrity, as we talked about, very important.
Yeah, actually, funny enough, you mentioned it exactly that way. We just merged in community support for Nitro enclaves with EC2 instances. So this is just additional functionality available from AWS that is, you know, kind of, I think it's more of like a hardware security model in that sense of it has some special sauce under the hood to run your EC2 instance a little bit more securely.
Which is very nice. If you have sensitive data, HIPAA data, or anything around payments, or well, these days in the EU, pretty much everything is PII. Enclaves are generally a great way of dealing with that. And you know, on the other side, you could always be using the HSM service for getting some more secure data into and out of your cloud accounts. So I'm curious, when you build against the HSM service, that one has a pretty steep startup rate. How do you make sure new changes to that just work out?
Honestly, I think we kind of treat most of the services pretty much the same when it comes to our approach to testing and that sort of thing. The only times it gets really a little bit more odd for us, I would say, is actually with organizations level testing. We're kind of just like every other kind of development team. We actually are part of like a HashiCorp, you know, organization within AWS, which makes some interesting fun with our security team as we poke all the APIs that say, let's delete IAM things and guard duty things and all of these other things that they want to keep on. But, you know, in general, I think the only one we've strongly balked at initially until we got a little bit of help from a partnership standpoint was Shield, just because it's so expensive up front. It's like, you know, 1 year commitment for like $36,000 or something.
Yeah, that's actually a good a good thing that Brian brought up. So one of the ways that we do work on testing is with folks at AWS. So for services that are a little bit more hands-on, or they require special hardware, we work with, again, our friends at AWS to test either in their lab environments or their testing environments, or to provision special environments so we can test in those services for things that we don't necessarily run at HashiCorp, or we really only need for a short time and don't need a full year of service for. So especially in the case of Outposts, that team has been super awesome in granting us access to their lab whenever we need it, and in the lab, access to an Outpost whenever we need it. So we can test not only Outposts, but features like S3 on Outposts and other things like that.
Which is nice, because if you know that that works, it's an easy way to extrapolate from there. So if you're just joining us, we're hosting the AWS Provider community office hours. We're here for your questions. And if this is your first reInvent deep dive or first time hearing about Terraform and you think what should I do during my holiday break? If you have one, we have an amazing Learn site at learn.hashicorp.com, and we'll get a link for that shared out with a lot of tutorials on how you can use Terraform and any of our other products. But specifically for AWS, we have a solid amount of tutorials there that will take you from installing Terraform to storing remote state, creating a couple of resources in AWS. And it's just a great new skill to pick up. Which actually makes me wonder, what was the first AWS resource that we supported?
I believe it was the AWS Instance resource was the first one. So way back in the day, I believe, yeah, the AWS Instance and some of the other core EC2 services were the very first Terraform resources before it kind of got expanded into other cloud providers and that sort of model.
And becoming much more of a plug-in architecture. Yeah, that instance has been around. I remember first time using that one and going why is it called AWS Instance? And how is the database instance going to be called? And the name was very predictable. I like things that didn't change. It's nice that some of my code from back then still works, but just this week, I actually had a friend of mine reach out to me. It's hey, using the AWS provider, there's a new version out. How hard is it to upgrade? And that's going from 2.4, I think, to whatever, depending on if we release today or not, 3.22. They were looking at upgrading. Brian, Mary, any tips for people who are trying to upgrade?
Sure. My easy tip, we have an upgrade guide on the registry with our documentation. So for folks who don't know, all of our documentation has moved officially to the Terraform registry. If you do try to go to the Terraform doc site, it will just redirect you to the registry. But on the registry, you can look at our 3.0 upgrade guide. That will give you just insight into any breaking changes that we have made in our last major release, how to work around those or prevent those, or what to expect in those cases. And then once you've read through that and checked through your code, I recommend testing in a sandbox environment or a dev environment before just upgrading in production, obviously. But yeah, check out the upgrade guide, test it out, see what works and what doesn't work. And then Brian might have some more fancy little tips.
Yeah, so when we go and we're thinking about what we want to do for what we call a major release, and this is where we know we're purposefully making breaking changes, to help either improve experiences or fix nasty bugs that would otherwise be kind of really hard to fix without breaking things. It boils down to the engineers from our side are actually taking real Terraform configurations and figuring out the steps that are necessary, whether it's just a matter of moving some arguments around in your configuration or additional permissions that are required. That all kind of boils down and gets written up into the upgrade guides. In terms of in between minor releases that we do weekly, it can slip in where, additional IAM permissions are necessary. We try to document them in the changelog, but sometimes they do slip in without a little note there. But other than that, we really try hard to make sure that your configuration that you applied with this minor version should mostly work, like almost every time with a new minor version of the same major version.
Yeah, those upgrade guides are super helpful. We shared a link to that in the chat. Of course, if you're using Terraform, you might also go through the upgrade cycle of Terraform core, which might be 0.12 to 0.13, 13 to 14, or whatever is next, which is going to be exciting. Or maybe the one after the next one is exciting. Actually, all of them are. Those upgrades are sometimes a little more involved, but they haven't been for the last release, which is super nice. For 0.12, we had a command line argument where you could just upgrade your old code. So if you're still on Terraform 0.12, you definitely might want to upgrade to 13. If you're below 12, then yeah, your New Year's resolution should definitely be, changing HCL1 to HCL2. It will just make your life more enjoyable and definitely allow you to take the new Terraform features on and use them in ways that you might have worked around before and now just have access to them in the core. For us, it's been super exciting just seeing, like 0.13 in summer, 0.14 a couple of weeks ago. And just the quality of life improvements have been very nice. Curious, Brian, what's your favorite 0.14 feature?
Oh, in fact, I was actually just going to pipe up with that. Yeah, the sensitive functionality, sensitive value handling in 0.14 is really neat. The ability to take an input variable, say, hey, I'm saying this is sensitive, please don't show it, and have that actually flow through all of the plan outputs and never show is really neat. And some of the additional functionality you can turn on with an experiment, the provider's sensitive adder experiment, I think it's called, is really neat too, where if we as the AWS provider say, hey, this particular attribute most likely definitely has like some sort of secret material in it, we'll put a flag in our code that says, hey, it's sensitive. Previously, the way that it would work was like Terraform would see that and say, okay, in that resources plan, it would make sure that it's redacted and everything. Now there's the ability to, and it's still being experimented with, is making sure that actually flows through other places as well. So if you have that as an output or something that you probably shouldn't be doing, then it will actually redact that as well.
Which is very nice, because your output not containing sensitive data, that is definitely a huge win. Just makes everything nicer. We don't need to have those things on screen, because who cares about passwords in plain text anyway? Mary, any 0.14 features that you absolutely like?
Brian stole my answer because I too am very excited about sensitive values, but from a different perspective. It's something that I've heard users talk to me about for such a long time. And so I will give a short snippet of my backstory, but I started here at HashiCorp as an engineer on the Atlas team, RIP Atlas. But at that time, folks were talking about sensitive values and like, how did we mark them as sensitive in Atlas? And then from there, I moved to our support team, and customers always were like, why did my password show up? Like, I tried to mark it as sensitive. What happened? And so to finally see users get a feature that they so deeply desired and needed has been really wonderful. And to work with Petros, who is the product manager for the core binary inside of Terraform, and listen in on some of the research that he's been doing and get to sort of see that through the whole way has been really exciting for me, and to, for us to deliver to users something that has such strong value has been really cool. So it's okay that Brian stole my answer, but that's also my answer.
It is a pretty great feature, so I get that you both are excited about that. In the meantime, I got another question, which is sort of serious. When will the AWS provider support Deep Racer?
Good question. I don't know that we ever will, though. I am a Formula One fan, so it is in my personal wheelhouse of interest, but I don't know if I can make the case for it to be in our product wheelhouse of interest, though I wish it were.
I mean, it has been kind of a history with Terraform that on April Fool's Day, there is occasionally things that drop in, like, ordering pizza from Domino's via Terraform Provider. So who knows, maybe this coming year.
Especially with sensitive values now being hidden, you can actually have your racing strategy just as a Terraform output without having to worry that the other team will see it. Yeah, we're just making these up as we go along. In the meantime, yeah, time flies, and it's amazing just looking back at this year of all the community office hours that we had. You two have been a huge part of that, and I just wanted to say thank you for being here once again. I'm just excited that we get to close the year like that together. It's been a rough year, but so much great stuff has happened for the AWS provider, and it's just, wow. But that's just, in terms of Terraform Thursdays, this might be our last one, but there's still another AWS deep dive in 30 minutes. Man, time flies, that we're hosting, and we'll have a link for that up in the YouTube chat in a second, just to make sure you too can see what's going on. We're going to be talking about ECS, Waypoint, and a little bit more Terraform, but not specific to the AWS provider maybe, except for the ECS parts, obviously. In the meantime, any thoughts on what people should try out with AWS and how they can best provide feedback to you?
Yes, I can talk about it. I would obviously try everything. The provider has such a wide breadth of support. Like we talked about, there's like over 600 resource types that we support. So I'm not going to say every single thing that you could possibly want is there, but try out the things that are important to you. And if they're not there, give us feedback. So open a GitHub issue, obviously the first thing, that's the best place to gather support from the community, right? Like our method for looking at GitHub issues is upvotes. We say it at the top of our GitHub issues. So, gather with the community, vote on issues, let us know. But otherwise, like, again, I think we said it earlier, schedule time with me. My job is literally to talk to all of you and to understand how you want to use the AWS provider, what you're doing in AWS, what you're doing in Terraform, and how to make that happen for all of you. So talk to me, whether you ping me on GitHub or schedule time with me on my calendar. I am here to receive your feedback.
I think that's always been so amazing that, as a practitioner, you have an idea, you have a request, and it doesn't matter if you're backed by a Fortune 500 or your startup is literally you for 10 hours a week and you just need a feature. We'll listen to it because there's so many people using this provider and Terraform that it makes sense for many of us probably to have that very specific feature. And one last question from our audience. A little off topic, but do you have any code or file system layout recommendations when using Terraform with a large multi-account AWS organization?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. I think probably, especially just due to the amount of time we have left today, definitely ask that question on the HashiCorp community forums. So that'll be discussed at hashicorp.com. But essentially, the solutions engineers here at HashiCorp do have some recommended patterns, and I believe they may be published in certain places, but I don't know them off the top of my head. So yeah, hopefully, asking in the community forums, somebody will get that into the right place for you and get the links for you.
I feel like this is one of those questions that can be perfectly answered with it depends, right? Because it depends on so many things. Like, how do you name things in your organization? How do you split them out? Is it based on teams? Is it geographically based? Is it all of the above? And are you just trying to figure out how many characters you can get into an organization name dash separated before AWS tells you it's too long? We've all been there. It's really hard. Some folks like monorepos, others like split out setups. It's all good. I think we have a blog post about that coming out in the future. But yeah, definitely head on over to discuss. We have a specific category for the AWS provider, but this is a more generic question. So feel free to ask it in any of the Terraform forums. And let's see what the other folks come up with. And with that, that's been office hours plus 1 minute for today for the Terraform AWS provider. We have another one coming up in 30 minutes. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Mary. This has been great, and I hope to see you two back next year.